Well, I'm ready to go to Luke chapter 15. How about you? Yeah, let's go back, and this is part three this morning. We began by looking at the story of the Prodigal Son, and we focused a couple of weeks ago on the lost prodigal, and that's where everybody focuses when they look at that story. But then last week I suggested we should take some time and look at the elder brother, and so that's what we did. And now today we're going to finish up our look at Luke chapter 15, the story of the prodigal, by focusing on the father. I've mentioned this a time or two earlier, but it's important I say it again, and I know that there are some people here this morning that haven't been here for the other two looks at this story. But in the picture that we're going to have up on the screen, or if you want to just look in the front of your bulletin, maybe you can see it a little bit more clearly there. Art historians suggest that this masterpiece painted by Rembrandt, that each of the three main characters that we're looking at, that we see a self-portrait of Rembrandt when he is a young person, and that is as the prodigal kneeling down. When he is middle-aged, in the far right, the elder brother looking down at the scene in displeasure and disapproval. And then you see the self-portrait of Rembrandt as you look at the face of the father. And we do know that, in fact, Rembrandt painted his interpretation of the prodigal late in life. He died a year or two after he painted the picture that you're looking at. He was an old man when he painted the picture. And so what you really see as you look at the picture is not only his interpretation of the prodigal, but you see this kind of self-interpretation of the person Rembrandt as he goes throughout life. And so the idea is that perhaps Rembrandt is trying to tell us something. That when we are young and carefree and rebellious, that we all become like the prodigal. We all rebel and we all think we know better than everybody else and we know better than God. And that's probably true of everybody in this room this morning. And then he suggests that perhaps that we all become like the elder brother at some point in our life to some degree or another. That is, we begin to look at everybody else and say, well, I'm glad I'm not like them anymore. I'm found, but they're lost. And so we kind of begin to look at other folk as though we're better than they are. And, well, maybe that's a natural progression, at least to some extent. But this is the truth we want to get a hold of this morning, is that we dare not stop being the prodigal and recognizing that we need to come back to God. We dare not get stuck in this idea that, oh, we're better than everybody else, and be like the elder brother. But the natural progression, the progression that you are invited to be a part of, is that you go on to emulate the Father. I'm going to say this quite a few times this morning, but here's the first time I'm going to say it. You be the Father. You be the Father. Now, if you were here last week, you might remember I got maybe a little more bold than I should have. I had, it was a different sermon, but years ago I was kind of preaching like that, and I was stepping on a lot of toes. And after the sermon, one old boy met me in the foyer, and he said, "Hey, preacher." And I go, "What?" He said, "You walked down the alley and kicked over every garbage can you saw." Well, I hope you didn't feel like that last week, but there is this idea that if we aren't careful, we can become like the elder brother, and we can become smug. And I gave you some examples of that I've seen down across the years in my own ministry. These folk that become the church folk, and they've been around the church for a long time, and if things don't go their way, or we start to reach a whole lot of new people, they cross their arms and they say, what about me? And we see those crossed arms up there on the screen of the elder brother. I mean, and I have seen it. Just a reminder, this idea of a disapproval by church bosses if we spend too much money on outreach. You know, we need to do an ROI, return on investment study to see if it's really worth spending a gallon worth of gas to reach the kids that live out there in the trailer park. Well, we need to stop and think about it. Is it really worth that? And I'm not going to preach that sermon again. You can relax. But, you know, this idea that, you know, we are here and we deserve all this, and, you know, what about those other folk? What about the idea of showing love to those that don't know that there's a God that loves them? And so I challenged you last week to not be like the elder brother. And so I hope that you process that okay. But now here today, here's the real question. So how do we reach people that are outside of the church? How do we reach people that don't understand that there's a God that loves them? How do we show people that are really hurting deeply that you and I really care about them? Now, years ago, and I've mentioned this before already, about the church growth movement. This idea that if you buy a kit at a seminar and you go home and implement it, you know, you're going to reach people. We had this program that we're going to implement at church. So, you know, this church growth movement taught us that. Church growth movement 30, 35, 40 years ago taught us that if we were out talking to people that weren't Christians or didn't know that there was a God that loves them, that we had this memorized script, like we were selling some sort of insurance. We just tried out this script that we had memorized, and so we were taught that we would go up to people that we don't even know and begin to ask them questions, and then we would look at these people that we don't even know. Maybe we've talked to them for 3 minutes, and we would ask this question: if you would die tonight, isn't that a great way to win friends? If you would die tonight and you would stand in front of the pearly gates and God would ask you this question, why should I let you into my heaven? How would you respond? And you know, I don't know, maybe that worked 30 or 35 years ago. I don't know, but I don't think that works too well today. And so this whole idea is, you know, how do we reach people? How do we let people know that there's a God that loves them? And I'm just going to say that I don't think there's a program that you can buy that will help you. I don't think there's a script that you can memorize that's just going to all of a sudden just make this church just you know, fill up to the seams again. I don't think that's the case. Many years ago, I worked in the office in a manufacturing facility. And one of my jobs was I was in charge of quality control. Me, which I thought was really funny. But part of my job was to go out into the plant and look at parts and see if they were meeting standard. This was a long time ago, before I went to seminary, many years ago. And we started work at 6 in the morning. And I remember one Monday morning, it was dark outside, it was chilly, it was raining, Monday morning, 6 o'clock, and I'm starting to walk through the plant, and I'm checking parts, and I'm walking through the plant, and I don't think they'd even turned all the lights on, and I'm walking through the plant Monday morning, 6 o'clock, dark outside, cold, rainy, dismal, and I'm whistling out loud. And Rick came around the corner, and he stood in front of me, and he planted his feet like this. And he just stared at me. And he said, "What are you so happy about?" And now I looked at Rick, and it was, I'm not a mind reader, but I'm looking at Rick, and I'm like, he's had a week-long, a party all weekend long. He's hung over. Hasn't shaved in 4 or 5 days because he been partying. 6 o'clock now, Monday morning, cold, dismal, rainy out, and he has to be at work. And he encounters me. What are you so happy about? And I said, "Do you really want to know?" "Yes, I want to know why you're so happy this morning." And we were just pretty close together. And so I stood there and I looked at him and I said, "I'm happy this morning because I know that God loves me and he has forgiven me of my sins." Now I have to tell you, something happened in that moment that now 35, 40 years later, I have never forgotten that moment, and I don't ever want to forget the moment. When I said those words, and I'm looking right into the eyes of Rick, something happened, and I could see down deep on the inside, and I don't know, I'm not a mystic, but it was almost like I was looking into the naked, desperate soul of a guy named Rick. Is there any Lord of the Rings fans here? Anybody like Lord of the Rings? Yeah, me too. So, you know when you see Gollum and he's looking like he's had a really bad day? That's what it looked like when I'm looking into the eyes of Rick. A desperate piece of humanity. Desperate, with eyes wide open, wondering if it's possibly true that there really is a God that cares about him. Can it be true that for him, a guy who has been rebellious, I think his whole life, a guy like him that's been out partying all weekend long, a guy like him that's been a desperate rebel, is it really possibly true that there is a God that loves me? And I saw him deep down on the inside. And I started to say something else, and then just as quickly as that deep inner look inside of his eyes came open, a wall went up. And he said this, "Huh." And he turned and walked away. But I've never forgotten Rick. And I've thought about him again and again down throughout the years, and I've prayed for him, and of course I lost touch with him 35 years ago. I don't know Rick's story. But if we ever have any hope of being the father to people like Rick, we have to generate a concern for their spiritual well-being. We have to care about people like that. And not just be caring about people on the inside of the church. And I know we care about each other and we're family and we love each other. But what about the Ricks? What about the people that you know that aren't in church this morning and they ain't ever going to go to church if they have their way about it? What about those folk? We've got to care about those people. We've got to figure out how it is that we can reach those folk. Now, I'm gaining new insight, really, about the parable of the prodigal by looking at the painting there. And like you, I hope you're learning some things. But as I'm looking at the posture of the three characters that we've been looking at, look at the posture of the prodigal. He is kneeling down at the feet of the Father in contrition. So there is the posture of kneeling down. The posture of the elder brother, represented by the figure on the right, I've talked about already maybe too much. But standing up, looking down his nose with his arms crossed, that posture. But look at the posture of the Father. The posture of the Father with his arms extended, with his palms down, with the touch of the Father upon the lost prodigal who has come back. It's as though in this painting, Rembrandt wants us to see that God reaches out and touches the lost with the love of a father, with the concern of a father. He is reaching, he is loving, he is touching. His arms are open wide. Several years ago, when I was doing an interim assignment in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, in North Idaho, I did what I do every time I go to a new assignment, and it's very critical that I do this. I find the best coffee shop in town. It took me a little bit, but I finally found the one in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho that I loved, and it was called the Grumpy Monkey. The Grumpy Monkey. And I love the Grumpy Monkey because it opened at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I could roll in there, get my coffee, you read and study, you just sit there, and it was wonderful. One day I went there and got my coffee, and there were two young men that were seated close to my favorite seat. How dare they? But anyhow, I sat down. I'm like, it's all right. They can be close, but they just leave me alone, So I sat down, and they're over there talking, and so finally I'm like, after I had a few sips of coffee, I'm a little more friendly. So I began to talk to them. And finally, one of the young men, late 20s, I guess, looked at me and said, I feel like we should pray. Is there anything that I can pray for you about? Now, I hadn't told him I was a pastor. I usually keep that on the down low. We hadn't talked about God. We hadn't talked about church. Hadn't talked about the Bible. Just out of the clear blue, this young man said, I feel like we should pray. Can my friend and I, can we pray? Is there anything we can pray for you about this morning? Now, he didn't obviously didn't know I was a pastor, and he didn't know that at that exact moment, remember there's a 2 or 3 hour time change between Midwest and Northwest. But at that exact moment, someone that I care about very deeply and I love dearly, at that exact moment was being wheeled into a hospital room for an examination that could have had deadly consequences. At that exact moment, the young man says, "Is there anything we can pray for you about?" And so I told him. And he looked at me and he stretched out his hand and said, "Let's pray together." And he grabbed my hand. And the other guy grabbed my hand. And the three of us in the Grumpy Monkey, about 5:45 in the morning, held hands. And he prayed for my loved one. Now to me, that's pretty weird. That's kind of bizarre. The timing, the guy just out of the clear blue, and then me having somebody back here in the Midwest going through this potentially life or death situation. Pretty weird for that to happen. But do you see in that moment what was going on? This young man became the father. Do you see that? That he reached out to me in love and concern, and he reached out and grabbed a hold of me, and he began to pray for me. We ought to read the text, shouldn't we? Let's read Matthew 15:20 to 24. And of course, it picks up after the prodigal comes to his senses, and it says, "So he got up and went to his father." But then this key verse, verse 20, that we're going to talk about now. "But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But of course the father said to his servant, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and let's celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate." Verse 20 now really answers the question how we can reach people outside of church, how we can begin to impact the lives of people that don't know that there is a God that loves them. It answers the question of how you and I can be the father to people in our life and in our sphere of influence. Verse 20, when you look at that, there is this phrase that says, "While he was a long way off, his father saw him." And so the first thing I suggest to you is that if we're going to be like the father, we have to watch for opportunity. Let's don't be like the elder brother when we see somebody in need, and let's don't cross our arms and look down at them and think to ourselves, "Man, I used to be like that. Glad I'm not like that anymore. Glad God saved me. Sorry about you." The first thing that we learn in this passage of Scripture about you being the father is that we have to watch for opportunity. Now, I wish with all my heart that God would somehow manufacture a special pair of glasses that you could put on, and that when you put them on, it gave you a superpower. And that when you put on these specially made glasses by the hand of God, that when you put the glasses on, when you looked at people, you not just only saw people, but you saw the hurt that they're going through. That when you looked at people and looked them in the face, you could see the pain that they have. You could see the situations in their life that are causing them significant trouble and keeping them awake at night. You could see how they view God and what they need God to come and do in their life. I wish we had special glasses like that. Well, I haven't found a pair like that, but here's what I know. I know that if we had special glasses like that, and if you could put those glasses on and walk throughout your day, you would be stunned to see the number of people that are dying on the inside, the number of people that are thinking about suicide, the number of people that are worried because their son or daughter doesn't talk to them, the people that are struggling financially, the people that are still dealing with being abused when they were children. Again and again and again. And what I'm saying is there are hurting people wherever you go. They are walking around like the walking dead. Like zombies throughout life. And they're waiting for you and me to be the Father. And so we watch for opportunity to begin to talk to them. We're not watching for an opportunity to be obnoxious, but we're watching for an opportunity to just slip in the good news that there is a God that really cares. Let them know that you care. How many times have you said to somebody, when you see somebody, you say, "Hey, how you doing?" I mean, this is what we do. This is standard greeting. And then we usually lie to each other. "Oh, I'm fine." "How are you?" And then then they lie to us. This is standard ritual, right? But when you do that, have you ever noticed sometimes when you say, "Hi, how are you?" and they go, "Oh, I'm fine." You can tell they're not. I stopped at Taco Bell this week and got me a bean burrito. And the girl behind the cash register, "May I take your order?" I said, "I want a bean burrito and a glass for water." And I said, "By the way, how you doing?" And she goes, "Oh, I'm fine." Watch for opportunity. And I said, "Oh, really?" I said, What's going on?" Because I knew she lied to me. You can tell, right? I don't have a special power. You have that power. And so I probed and I said, "What's going on?" And she started to cry in Taco Bell. She starts to cry and she said, "I just got some really bad news." And then there were people that were lining up behind me waiting for me to get out of the way because they needed a bean burrito. But it gave me an opportunity. You see? I mean, you can do that. I mean, just that's the first thing we need to do is watch for opportunity. Then the next phrase on the screen, and by the way, if you really want to know how to reach people like the Father, you might want to take notes. First one is opportunity. The next one is that phrase, "and was filled with compassion." Find a way to fill your heart with compassion about people that don't know there is a God that loves them. Find a way to do that. Now, I want to remind yourself that at the first sermon that we talked about, the prodigal, that when the prodigal said to his dad, I want my inheritance now, in that cultural and legal setting, what that boy was saying to his dad was, I want you dead. I want you dead. If only you were dead, so I can have all that's coming to me. I want you dead. And so this deep, deep hurt and pain that the father experienced. But when the father saw the son coming back, he was still filled with compassion. He didn't cop an attitude. He didn't say to himself, oh man, you've hurt me so bad, I'm just going to make you sweat a little bit. He was filled with compassion. And I hope you understand that we all need to get to the place where we are filled with compassion and filled with love, even to those that have done us wrong and hurt us and betrayed us and disappointed us. We should all get to that point. Remind yourself that when you study the New Testament, we learn that God is love, and Jesus talks again and again and again about loving one another, loving each other. That's what this is all about. Jesus was asked, this is review. I see if you remember, what's the greatest commandment? And he said this, loving God. And then the second is like the first, loving each other. See, this whole thing is about love. God is love, and God loves us, and that means that we should be filled with love and compassion for those around us. Now, the third thing that we need to do if we're going to really begin to reach people is in that phrase, he ran to him. He ran to him. And so, be like the Father, and you go to them. Again, years ago, we had this idea that, the church growth thing, the movie, Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. Nope. Don't work that way, does it? It might have 40 years ago, if you build a big building, people will see the big building and they'll just come check it out. Those days are gone. It doesn't work that way at all. That day is over. But we need to go to them. And you need to let people know that you love them and you care about them. And if, by the way, there's somebody that you are at odds with, maybe someone who has left the church and they have hard feelings against you and you have hard feelings against them, and you're hurt, and you're waiting for them to pick up the phone and call you and say, well, I'm sorry I left the church. I'm sorry that I disappointed you. If you're waiting for them, you don't wait for them. You go to them. An amen would have been great right there. Thank you. Don't wait for them. You say, well, why not? Because I was wronged. So was the Father. Why not? I've been deeply and profoundly hurt. So was the Father. And we look at the story and we see that the Father was filled with love for the one who disappointed him and wounded him deeply. And when he saw him, he was filled with compassion. And he went like this, well, he ought to come here to me. No, he ran to him. And to me, That sets the example. That's the challenge for us. We ought to go to those folk and let them know that we're okay with them. We love them. We care about them. And so I'm going back to my phrase. So you be the Father. You be the one that reaches out. You be the one that takes the initiative. Well, I've been hurt deeply. Well, get over it. I can't believe I just did that. Oh, man. And then that last phrase that I want to point out is this. The Father threw his arms around him and kissed him. He didn't just go to him, but he made contact with him. Now, in the father-son relationship, he reached out and he touched him physically. And maybe you have people in your sphere of influence that you're related to or you've been good friends with, and that's appropriate. You know, touch like that, or reach out and touch their shoulder. You know, today we have to be careful about stuff like that, but touch them. Now, you don't have to think about touch just being physical, but touch them with your kind words. Touch them with your sympathetic demeanor. There are a lot of ways that you can touch. One of the churches I did was in Mesa, Arizona. And when I went there, they had already lost possession of their building. They went bankrupt. Their mortgage payment was $35,000 a month. And they'd gotten down to about 85 people by the time I was on the scene. They had a campus about like yours, a beautiful, man, just a beautiful place. And they lost it. And they were in the throes of getting rid of all of the possessions because they had to move. And so we had to find them a place to worship in like a strip mall, just a really small sanctuary. And that the demographics of that congregation, the average age was far, far older than the average age of this congregation that I'm looking at right now. It was an old congregation. And not only were the people in it old, they took pride in knowing that in all of the greater Phoenix area, they were the oldest church. I mean, they were formed in like 1493. And they were proud of it. And I'm like, man, what hope does this church have? I mean, so anyhow, we worked our way through that, and they helped me, and I helped them a little bit, and they got a pastor, and that pastor went in there, and he had the nerve to suggest, we're going to change the name of this church. Woo! Uh-oh. And you know what? They embraced the idea. And the name of that church today is not called Mesa First Baptist. The name of that church is called The Connect. That's it. The Connect. You know, they left behind their legacy, the name, the first, not second, third, or fifth, or fourth. the connect. And what the pastor was trying to help them to understand was, it's all about connecting with people. It's all about connecting with people that don't know that there is a God that loves them. Let's connect with our neighbor. Let's connect with the people we work at in the office or in the factory. Let's connect with people at school. Let's connect with them. And guess what? I found out that the change helped the church. They rallied. They bought an abandoned Walgreens drugstore. And they transformed the inside. And they moved from that little place in that strip mall, moved into that renovated Walgreens store, drugstore. And man, is that church ever taking off. And I think part of the reason is people bought into this idea of the importance of connecting with one another. And we see it here, how the Father connected and reached out and touched his rebellious son who had come back. He reached out and touched him. And so I'm asking for you to be the Father. I'm asking that you take the initiative to reach out to people that are hurting, that you take the initiative to pick up the phone, that you take the initiative this afternoon to sit at your laptop and compose an email to the person that you're thinking about right now. I'm asking that you be the Father. In my last church as a traditional pastor, I was there 10 years. And there was a guy there that he was the patron saint. I mean, the patron saint of the church. I mean, he was the guy. And he was the kind of guy, I mean, he was an older man. He was small. He was gentle. But when he walked into a room, it just lit up because he was there. You know people like that? And he was the kind of guy that when there was trouble in the church, he would go and talk to them privately. I mean, he wasn't elected to any position or anything like that, but he was the man. And so if there was problem in the church, if people were, for example, talking about the pastor behind his back and starting to stir up trouble, this guy went and talked to them privately and smiled, and he would say this: "We don't do that here." Oh. We don't do that here. And everybody loved him. He was like the Father. You could see his love and care and concern, and he would just gently guide. He would just gently help, and I mean, he was the man. But he got sick. Yep. He got cancer. And he got sick, and he fought hard, and it became evident that he wasn't going to make it. And when it became evident that his time here was drawing to a close, I had people come up to me and say, "What are we going to do when Roger dies? What are we going to do?" And I'm like, "Yeah, what are we going to do?" And then I started to develop an answer. And then my answer became, when somebody came and said, "What are we going to do?" Because he was the man. My answer was this: you be Roger. You be like Roger. And if it's too difficult for you to say, to hear me say, you be like God, because there's a little bit of distance between you and God, or a little bit of, God's like perfect and you're not quite so perfect, like me. If that's a struggle for you, let me say to you, you be like Roger. Or maybe you have a patron saint that you know. Do you know somebody like that from your childhood days that was always there for you, that always guided you, always loved you? Maybe it was a pastor, maybe it was a grandparent, maybe it was a parent, but they were just like whatever. My grandfather, my preacher grandfather was like that. The joke was he could never go swimming because he walked on water. He was just like that. And you know people like that. So here's the thing. You be like that person. Hey, it's your turn. You be the Father. You be the Father. You be like God. You watch for opportunity. You be filled with compassion. You run to them and reach out and touch with the touch of God. You be the Father.